This podcast discusses true crime, which may entail violence and other material intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised.
And it's Lexi.
Wasn't sure if it was done counting there for a second.
You were like, hey. Watched you freeze.
Right. What do you have for us?
So today I'm going to be covering a case that was actually suggested to me a while back by a friend of mine. So Cole, if you're listening, shout out to you. I'm covering a case you requested. So this is about a man named Stephen Brian Pennell, also known as the Route 40 Killer. This man is, as far as we know, Delaware's only serial killer in recent history. Like, I know Delaware's a tiny state, but like one serial killer?
It's kind of like, I don't know, kind of like Rhode Island. Does Rhode Island have one?
That's such a good question.
Because Rhode Island's really small too.
Rhode Island, yep, they sure do have one. Oh, ooh, recent too. Oh, between 2003 and 2004.
Oh.
Oh, that's very recent. Oh, I guess one of us is going to have to cover that in a future episode. Wow. Okay.
Killers of tiny states.
Right.
New section.
So this man earned his nickname for, a pretty apparent reason. He committed the murders in Newcastle County, Delaware, where he abducted his victims off of primarily Route 40. So there's not a lot of records about his early life. And what there is surprisingly tame, which I feel like is not very common. It's very rare that we start out these episodes with, and they had a normal, healthy childhood. So Pennell was born November 22nd, 1957 in Wilmington, Delaware, and he seemed to be a shy and unassuming child in his early years and was apparently obsessed with police work as a child. He was frequently like talking to local cops in their off time and like quizzing them on stuff. So that was really it. Just was really into police work, but otherwise seemed relatively normal and shy. No like immediate red flags there. I feel like that's like a very normal thing for a kid to be into.
Yeah, it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? A cop? Cool. Then you
right,
just
like
get a whole
cops,
bunch of
trucks.
cop stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of like there's like 6 careers when you're a kid. That's like, yeah, that's what I'm going to pick to be my personality for the next like 5 years of my life.
Yeah.
And then you learn that like accounting is a thing and you're like, "Oh, okay. Maybe I should weigh my risk benefit." You know, I feel like it's like veterinarian, doctor, police officer / firefighter. Construction, that's a big one.
Archaeologist, I feel
Maybe
like, is a lot.
Maybe like astronaut is in there.
Yeah, astronaut.
And like pro athlete. I feel like those are pick one, you know, you're 5 years old, pick one to make your personality. So Pennell did study criminal justice in college in hopes of becoming a police officer, but he ended up failing the physical assessment portion. So he never was able to become a law enforcement official. Pennell did, however, become an electrician instead in 1987. At this time, he was married. He had a wife with 2 sons, and his wife had a daughter from a previous relationship. So Pennell was apparently just an absolute mountain of a person. He was nearly 6.5 feet tall, over 2 meters for our listeners across the pond, and roughly 300 pounds. And
Wow.
he worked as a bouncer as a side gig to his electrician job.
Yeah, he did.
Yes, he was huge.
What else are you going to do?
Exactly, right? I will say I'm a little bit shocked that it said he failed the physical fitness portion of being a police officer. Like, I feel like with that stature, you kind of have a little bit of an advantage.
Maybe with some things, but maybe like he wasn't like, his cardio wasn't up or something.
That's
Somebody have to
what
like, be able to run like a mile in like a certain amount of time.
That's what I'm thinking. Like maybe there was like a cardio portion or something like that because, you know, just the larger you are, the harder it is to move that mass, really. So even though he looked intimidating, the people around him seemed to describe him as anything but, and apparently he had a lot of difficulty holding down a job. One quote that I was reading in an article basically said that his presence, quote unquote, did not command respect. Whatever that meant. So we do see the first major glaring red flag of violence in his adulthood where he did allegedly beat his wife, once breaking her arm during a domestic violence incident, which did not go on to be reported to police, which is fairly common for very severe and dangerous domestic violence incidents, because oftentimes reporting will sometimes escalate the abuse without actually protecting the victim.
Yeah.
So even though I technically, like, you know, you have to, you know, use the word allegedly, like, he had a history of domestic violence, and this is a very significant predictor of that violence escalating to something like family annihilation, being a serial killer, etc. It's never something that just sort of gets better.
No.
So Pennell committed his first murder on November 29th, 1987. The victim was a woman named Shirley Anna Ellis, and she was last seen leaving her shift at a hospital in Wilmington, Delaware. Her body was later found by Route 40 by two boys, and it was clear that Ellis had been severely brutalized, which was confirmed later by autopsy. And it became a regular event for Pennell to take long night drives up and down routes 40 and 13 in Newcastle, Delaware, as he apparently suffered from insomnia. This also made it easy for him to sort of abduct these girls without witnesses. There were no witnesses for Ellis's abduction that reported seeing her get into a car with anyone, reported seeing her approached by anyone. She was just last seen leaving the hospital, and then her body was later found on the side of the road, where it was very, very clear in the state of it. They had found pieces of duct tape in her hair. She had significant bludgeoning on her head, and her clothing was significantly torn.
Oh, wow.
But no one had seen her, you know, no one had any idea what happened in between her leaving the hospital and then her being discovered. So the second of Pennell's victims was a woman named Catherine DeMorrow on June 28th, 1988. So DeMorrow's remains were discovered at a construction site around 6 a.m. by the workers the next morning. She had been brutalized in a very similar fashion to Ellis, specifically with multiple hammer wounds to her skull, but her body was also found to be covered in blue fibers, which was not something originally seen on Ellis. So this is where we start to get a little bit of an idea of who that, like, a little more evidence, a little more something to work with on who is taking these women.
I feel like the hammer is also an escalation, because that wasn't on the first victim, right?
It was actually.
Was
Sorry,
it?
I think I forgot to mention that, but yes. So basically, all of Pennell's victims were found beaten to death by multiple blows from a common hammer to the skull.
Oh, wow.
I don't generally like to put a lot of gory details. Like, I know it is a true crime podcast, but it's also just not our vibe to just go into the violent descriptions of the actual slaying itself in detail. But I will say this one is at least a little bit of relevant, is something that was common with all of the victims is almost all of them were found bound in some way, usually with duct tape, with significant head bludgeoning, usually the instrument in question being identified as a hammer. None of them were found with any evidence of sexual assault, and usually their clothing was found to be torn or missing.
I wonder what his motive was, because if it wasn't robbery and it wasn't, like, sexually charged, then I don't know,
And
like,
what's
just to do it then.
What's strange to me is throughout the trial and throughout my research in this case, not to spoil anything, but that's never really revealed. It's truly just never really revealed why he decided to start doing this someday.
Maybe it was just like a power trip for him, because he was so big, he knew he could, like, overpower women.
That's what I'm wondering. Is maybe it felt like it was like something that he had control over, and I guess maybe that was his motive.
Maybe.
And we know that there was always kind of that violence brewing out of the surface, because even if there was nothing formally documented in his childhood that was abnormal, no one just wakes up one day and is like, I'm going to beat my wife so severely that I break her bones. You know, something has to happen before that. That doesn't just come out of the blue. But the trial was weird, which I will get into. So, following the second discovery, law enforcement had determined that the two women were the work of the same serial killer and formed a task force of 60 people to try and catch him. And on August 22nd, 1988, a woman named Margaret Lynn Finner disappeared and was found 3 months later near the Chesapeake, Delaware Canal. Her remains were badly decomposed, but still showed signs of similar torture to the 2 other women. Her body was able to be identified via dental records. Witnesses had reported Finner being seen getting into a blue Ford with a white male the day she went missing. So this one, at least, there were some witnesses to her abduction. And on September 16th, 1988, a woman named Michelle Gordon was also seen entering a blue Ford with a white male. Her body was discovered on the 20th of that same month near the same canal that Finner would later be discovered. Gordon's autopsy showed signs of being poisoned to death with cocaine, likely by Pennell, as her injuries sustained were determined to be post-mortem on autopsy. And on September 23rd, 1988, a woman named Kathleen Meyer disappeared after being seen getting into, again, a blue Ford, which was later determined to belong to Pennell. But her body, unfortunately to this day, has never been found. He was brought to justice relatively shortly. So on September 14th, 1988, an undercover cop, my goodness, I am reading like too many words ahead today. I'm so sorry. On September 14th, 1988, an undercover cop named Renee Tashner, who was posing as a sex worker along Route 40, noticed a blue Ford that passed by her 7 times in 20 minutes. She continued onto a more isolated section of road, hoping Pennell would follow her, and he did. So he did open the door to try and convince Tashner to get in his vehicle, and when he did that, Tashner noticed the interior of the Ford had blue carpet like the ones found on Tomorrow. Now, I know this was the 80s, but I feel like blue carpet in a car is not very common.
No, that has to be like a specialty car thing. Like, that's not a common thing.
Yeah. Like, blue upholstery is like I've seen gray, I've seen champagne, I've seen black. I don't think I've ever seen blue. Even like navy blue. I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen like red maybe like in my great-grandparents, because theirs was like, it was old, an old car, but like I don't think I've seen a blue carpet.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Pennell did try to nervously convince Tashner to get into his vehicle, and Tashner had managed to convince Pennell that she was too tired, but still managed to tear some blue carpet from the Ford at the edge of the door for forensic testing and wrote down the license plate number. Police were able to obtain a warrant to search Pennell's vehicles and property and initially bugged his van, where Pennell did actually find and remove the bug, but at that point, the police had plenty of evidence to secure a warrant. And on his property and his van, they found evidence of hair, blood, and prints that all matched the victims. And this was also there was also discovered what was described as a torture kit in this vehicle, which contained duct tape, restraints, knives, pliers, handcuffs, and needles.
Oh, the needles are just, no.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was, I mean, it's very clear that he was not just murdering these women. I mean, he was torturing them to death.
That made me think of, have you heard of the Toy Box Killer?
I think so. Didn't we cover that in a much earlier episode?
I'm not covering that one. That one is like, he had like severe toys, quote unquote, and like he would tie you up and then like have this record playing of like this recording that he made of like what's going to happen to you.
Oh, that's horrific. I have heard of the Toy Box Killer. I don't know. I don't know if like I know the full details about the case, but the name sounds extremely familiar. I wonder if it's something that maybe I talked about in a forensics class in college.
Maybe. It's a pretty like well-known case.
So something interesting is when Pennell was arrested, he allegedly said, quote, "Well, I guess it's time," unquote, to the arresting officers. Like he just knew he was eventually going to get caught and was like, oh yeah, might as well be now.
Oh my God.
Just baffling. It's just a very baffling case.
So nonchalant about the whole thing. Like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess it's time.
Yep. So Pennell was arrested November 29th, 1988. Interesting thing about when he was arrested. I was talking about this case with a coworker of mine. And I was talking with, actually, I was talking with two coworkers of mine about, I'm like, yeah, this is the case I was covering, because a bunch of my coworkers follow the podcast, and, they'll ask me about it and we'll talk about it. And I'm like, yeah, I was like, I'm actually covering a case that someone suggested about a serial killer, based in Delaware. And my other coworker walks by and he's like, oh, you're talking about Pennell. And I was like, yeah, how'd you know? Maybe assuming they just knew it was Delaware's only serial killer. He was like, yeah, I was there the day he got arrested. So I work with someone who was on a job site with Pennell when he worked in construction. And I guess what he said Pennell just gave him the creeps. Like he just met him that day. He's like, that guy just gives me the creeps. He's like, I don't like him. I don't get good vibes. Like he's like, he hasn't done anything, but he is making me really uneasy. And I guess he must have joked with like his supervisor at the time. He's like, I wonder if, he's got any connection with the girls that have been going missing. And I guess they sort of looked at his plates and told Brian, or, told my coworker to like lay low. And we're kind of like, yeah, just stay away from him. He's creepy. And then eventually they revealed to him that they were like, the police are en route. Like they are coming to arrest him. And he said like 5 cop cars showed up and took him into custody.
That's crazy.
So I just happened to know someone personally who met this guy right before he got arrested and was like, he just scared the you-know-what out of me. It's like he gave me such the creeps. And when I told my supervisor about it, I'm like, hey, that guy just makes me really uneasy. They kind of looked into it a little bit and were like, that's a license plate. That's wanted. And they...
Like it's all clicking.
Yep. And they notified the proper authorities and had him taken in. So... I don't know if he just happened to be right place, right time, or if him actually saying something to his supervisor spurred them to contact law enforcement, or if they were already in pursuit.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of a very wild degree of separation that I found out yesterday that I have from this case.
Yeah, how rare is it to like know somebody that like met, like not, I guess they kind of met the serial killer.
Yeah.
That's
crazy.
I
mean, he did meet him. He did. I guess he spoke with him at the work site and just said he just had awful vibes. I mean, now we know why. So let me see here. So during the trial, Pennell's defense tried to claim that the carpet fibers were illegally obtained from Pennell's vehicle, making the evidence moot. The claim was dismissed by Judge Gebelain by stating the carpet was immediately visible once Pennell's door was opened and therefore was fair game. The prosecution had overwhelming DNA evidence against Pennell as well, and this was the first trial in the U.S. to utilize DNA evidence as absolute legal evidence. And a team of experts and scientists were also present for the trial to verify the accuracy and validity of the DNA results. So this is kind of a major precedent because DNA as the structure and function was only discovered in the 50s. So it being able to be used as effectively damning forensic evidence in the 80s was like kind of a pretty big deal at the time. And now it's standard. DNA evidence is very, very standard in forensics now.
Yeah, I couldn't remember which, because I think the use of fingerprints was on like the mid-90s, whenever they were able to use fingerprints.
That's surprising to me. That is actually really surprising. I would have think that fingerprints would be older than that.
Like, the CODIS, is it CODIS or something, where they have like the fingerprint system? I think I'm getting things confused. Because I took forensic.
Database? Fingerprint database?
Yeah.
Oh boy. Is it AFIS? Automated
Maybe.
Fingerprint Identification System?
Maybe.
I don't know. History of biomet. Well, that's going to be a new episode. That is a very long article. So we're going to have to dissect this one in the Discord after this. But, so, on November 23rd, 1989, Pennell was initially charged guilty of the murders of DeMauro and Ellis, but acquitted of Gordon's murder due to lack of evidence. He was given 2 life sentences. Pennell's lawyer had attempted to appeal the court about the carpet fibers being obtained illegally, but was unsuccessful. And Pennell dismissed his lawyer and elected to represent himself after this. After dismissing his lawyer, Pennell had pleaded to receive the death penalty, quoting verses from the Bible regarding the punishment he should receive.
What?
He fired his lawyer and requested the death penalty. Yep.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yes. Again, everything about this case, motive-wise, is very, very, very confusing to me.
That is confusing. Like, why? Like, as a criminal, wouldn't you want, like, the lesser sentence instead of, like, oh, you know what, just kill me.
You would
kill me.
think,
Get it over
yeah.
with.
So, in 1991, due to newer evidence, he was convicted of both the murders of Gordon and Meyer, to which he pleaded no contest. But he did refuse to reveal the location of Meyer's body, which is why to this day it has still not been found. Pennell was formally put to death by lethal injection on March 14th, 1992.
Wow.
And
that's what he wanted, so.
Yeah, and that is what I have for you on Stephen Pennell, Delaware's only serial killer, and someone I have 1 degree of separation from.
That's
Twisted.
a weird, twisted one.
Yeah. So this
I wonder-
one had, like I said, I was really hoping for a little bit more of like some early life stuff to kind of help explain his propensity to violence, and I found so little. So it was definitely a weird one.
I'm looking on Kindle. No, there's no books on him that I can find.
No. I almost feel like for it being such a strange case, such strange behavior for a serial killer, that it would be more popular. But I mean, I guess that's kind of why we're here on this podcast, is to give you guys the stuff you haven't already heard of before. It's why we haven't covered like Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
Like, you guys know who that is.
Yeah, like, because normally, like, I feel like there was, like, maybe one other we covered where they had, like, an okay childhood. Like, 1 or 2 where their childhood was, like,
Yeah.
somewhat normal.
Yeah.
Then, like, they maybe have had, like, a traumatic brain injury. And there's, like, it's so controversial, and if that even causes anything. So I'm not
Yeah.
going to touch on that.
Yeah. And there's also the other thing, too, is sometimes even when they're reported to have a really normal childhood, like, someone can be lying. Like, the neighborhood cats could all be going missing, but they're like, not my boy, you know?
It's just a coincidence.
Right. I mean, I feel like we all know at least, like, one parent that, like, their child can do no wrong, and their child is, like, already a serial killer.
Oh, my gosh. It makes me think of the, you've probably had to have heard of this, the Steubenville rape case.
Yes.
Years ago,
yes.
like,
How his mom
12-ish years
was,
ago?
like, his biggest defender.
Yeah, like, oh, he can do no wrong. He doesn't deserve to be punished. Like, no, he does. He deserves to be punished.
He very much does. I swear, I think some parents, like, have kids and their brain just falls out. Like, I don't know a better way to describe it, because I mean, we've covered other criminal cases where the mother defends them or is in total denial or even enables them. I was reading about a case today where there was a woman who was using a teaching job to traffic students for her adult son. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I just was seeing that on Twitter today, scrolling by, and that was really horrific.
That's beyond enabling. That's just you're an accomplice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're more than an accessory at that point.
Like, you're a human trafficker. That's
Yes.
that's
Yes.
excessive.
Yes, exactly. And that, my glasses clearly do not fit on top of my head with my headphones. But that is what I have for you today on Stephen Pennell, the Route 40 killer. If you guys have any suggestions, any more discussion, the Discord is the best place for it. We've also got our Patreon. And I think we've got some new members recently. Welcome. It's a lot of fun having new people on the Patreon. Please vote. Please vote for the bonus episodes. Otherwise, you will give me free reign once again. And I did weird things last time I was given free reign. I go to Reddit and I find whatever speaks to me. And I feel like that was strangely wicked.
That was confusingly wicked.
Yeah.